Okay, I am impressed by the number of people that we keep bringing on this show right now. I got to tell you, Shoulder 360 has been an absolute treasure trove here for the Ortho Show. We have Howard Routman on. Love this story. He talks about his experience as a DO, which is a doctor of osteopathy, and his experience of really breaking into mainstream orthopedics. He was the first DO recognized by the ASES. His serendipitous journey into reverse total shoulder replacement, where he's working with Mark Frankel, and literally in 2002 started putting in reverse shoulder replacements and has literally done as many as just about anyone in the country. He is a master surgeon with a great story, and it's an absolute pleasure to have shared. You're going to love it. Dr. Sigman, #follow the fro.
From Medical Media, this is The Ortho Show.
Hello world, Dr. Scott Sigman, your favorite opioid-sparing orthopedic surgeon, here for another episode of the Ortho Show podcast, coming at you live from Shoulder 360. It's just incredible the number of amazing orthopedic surgeons that we've had. We're bringing on today Dr. Howard Routman, who is an orthopedic surgeon who's a shoulder specialist in private practice down here in Palm Beach, Florida. So not too much of a drive for you to get down here, Howard, but we appreciate you being here, man.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun so far.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So I'm getting a sense we got a little New York action going on for you, born and bred?
Born in New York, and my family lived there until I was around 10 years old, and we moved to South Florida.
Yeah, well, you guys figured it out. Most of the New Yorkers go back and forth, but you guys just decided to stay down here, huh?
Yeah. It was we moved down as a whole clan, and my family set up shop in North Miami. In 1980, so we were here for the Miami Dolphins were pretty good at the time, and They've only gotten worse since.
It's so true. The number of Miami Dolphins fans are typically the minority based on who the visiting team is, for sure.
Exactly,
it could be that way. All right, so born and bred in New York, and so was medicine. Was there other doctors in the family? Was this a passion or sort of a process? Or tell us.
I was the first member of my family for generations to go beyond college, and it really wasn't much of there wasn't really a plan B. The joke is there was either orthopedic surgery or repairing outboard motors on boats in the Keys. So I'm glad that plan A worked out. Going to UF and everything worked out there for me to be able to get into the DO school that was down in South Florida, right next to my neighborhood where I grew up.
Yeah, so fantastic. So Florida for undergrad, and then you decide that medical school is the way to go. And was DO the path for you, or talk to us about that?
No, it was an unusual situation because I met with our guidance counselors at the university, and we talked about following a medical path, and there were a number of different schools that had that were really within very clear admission guidelines for all over the country. And then there was this option to go to a school that was really in my neighborhood growing up, which, get back to be with my family after being away for a period of time. And it just seemed to make sense. So I applied and I went down there, and it was during that interview process for the medical school that I even realized what a DO school was. I was totally ignorant to the major differences. It took me a little while to sort of figure it out. And then it ended up making sense for me. The timing was right for me to be able to go home.
Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we get going, but it's all about shout-outs here on the Ortho Show. So some of my favorite orthopedic surgeons on the planet are DOs: Sharif Bichet, Sean McMillan, Wasik Ashraf, just to name a few, but and also Chris Doherty as well. We can't forget good old Chris in Arkansas. But so really a great path to be able to really become established and terrific orthopedic surgeons. So after DO, it's time you got to do a residency. So you're going to head up to Philadelphia for your residency. Tell us about that.
Well, 4 years in Philadelphia, I think that if someone's from Philadelphia, they would say that I never actually lived in Philadelphia, because I never once went down to the Jersey Shore over the summer, and we basically spent the whole time just being an orthopedic resident. The PCO and residency program that I was a part of was and continues to be such a very surgically heavy program that the residents are constantly in the operating room, and when you get home, you just get home. So they beat us up pretty good. We learned a ton. And for me, the thing that I felt was the least amount of exposure that I had in residency was actually shoulder surgery. We were doing total knee replacements very early on in our training. We did a ton of general orthopedic surgery, but shoulders I thought was a little bit of a area of a blind spot. And this was during a time where Jerry Williams and Joe Ionati were both in Philadelphia together at Penn. So I spent a little bit of time following them around, and I became a little bit enamored with shoulder surgery.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, I just smile. There was an article in the Boston Globe about a number of the residencies across the country that are wanting to unionize. And one of the main reasons that they wanted to unionize was so that they could get their teeth cleaned for, health purposes. And I just harken back to the residency in the times that we were working 120 hours or so. And, it's just a very different world. But, getting those reps in your residency is what, gives you the skill set to become a master surgeon down the line.
It really makes a difference, particularly if you have faculty that are really willing to, give you an opportunity to learn. And, the faculty that we had in the program were enthusiastically supportive of us and allowed us to, get our hands in very early on.
It's pretty cool that they allowed you to spend some time outside of the program to be able to work with some of the great shoulder greats that happened to be in Philadelphia at the time.
Yeah, Jack McPhillamy, who was our program director, was the team doctor for the Sixers, and he had great connections with all the different subspecialists in the area. So when I told him that I was interested in seeing some shoulders, he just picked up the phone and called Jerry Williams, and he said, yeah, come on over, you can spend some time with us. So it was great to be connected in that way.
And then so fellowship from there. So tell us about fellowship.
So I wanted to do a shoulder and elbow fellowship. I didn't want to do a sports fellowship. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Our residency was very sports heavy. And at the time in the U.S., there were only 12 shoulder and elbow slots. So it was, I think the odds were tough to be able to get that. There were so many great candidates. And I had been given the advice that, don't waste one of those spots if you're not going to be going into academics. If you're not going to go in and be part of a university system, then why would you want to do a shoulder and elbow fellowship? Because those spots are really reserved for folks going down the university path. And I think that of the other 11 people that year, they all did. They all went into academics. And I, from the start, wanted to go into private practice. I interviewed with George McCluskey at the Houston Clinic in Columbus, Georgia, and we hit it off, and he offered me a spot, and it's clearly changed the direction of my life. Yeah, no, it's really remarkable, and it's funny how people choose their fellowships, right? A fellowship can be, well, I want to get a little extra experience to hone my skills. For others, it fills gaps within, a residency that you're looking to improve on. And then, potentially doing something that springboards you to a new level, and certainly you are one of the most well-respected shoulder specialists. You're on faculty for every single shoulder meeting that there is, which there are plenty of those, I'm sure. And, but I think it's really, quite remarkable that as a private practitioner, you've really sort of gotten to that level and people respect your opinion as much as they do. So let's talk a little bit about the DO thing, because I think it oftentimes can be, confusing for patients, but also, for our listeners. We have a lot of young listeners that are out there that are considering medical school, and DO is an option. And I think the lines have really become very blurred at this point between DO and MD medical schools. And as I said previously, some of my favorite, most skilled orthopedic surgeons are DOs. But tell us about the process of getting into mainstream orthopedics, through the DO, and was that difficult for you, and what was your experience? So at the time when I graduated from DO school, there were very few orthopedic residency slots that were DO orthopedic programs. So they were incredibly competitive, and it really is just it's a bloodbath going through the whole process trying to get one of those slots. And if you're fortunate enough to be able to get selected for an orthopedic residency program, then you're sort of self-select into an area where these programs that are DO-friendly orthopedic programs, they're in environments in which the leaders of the program are prominent DO orthopedic surgeons already. So it's almost a strange situation, because while you're in it and while you're doing in the residency program, you don't really consider that, you don't think yourself as, I'm a DO doing an orthopedic residency program. You're just working your tail off and trying to learn as much as you can. Sure. And then when you finish your training, you realize you enter into a community, and they're like, what do you mean? What is that? What is the deal? Is that a doctor of orthopedics? And you have to explain that it's just a different pathway that I took to get to where I was. And, ever since the Flexner curriculum changed how medical schools should be, there's been a rather standard approach to how medical students are taught. And when you finish medical school, you leave with a set of skills, and it's what you do with it after that that sort of, makes a difference in terms of where you go in your career. And that's the way it's been forever.
Yeah, no, terrific explanation for our listeners in particular. But yet many of the societies, still do not necessarily recognize DOs. And obviously, if you're going to be a shoulder specialist and that's your passion, you're going to want to be a member of ASCS. I mean, American Shoulder and Elbow Society. It's just, that's the club, and that's where you want to be. So tell us about your experience there.
Yeah, when I finished my training and I did a ASCS fellowship, there was really no pathway that allowed for me to become a member of the ASCS, because the bylaws of the ASCS required membership in the AAOS that DOs didn't qualify for. And then when the AAOS changed their rules for DO membership, ASCS then changed their rules to accommodate that. So then I became the first DO to get into the ASCS, and it was the most exciting
highlight of your career.
I was on the street with my wife in Las Vegas when I got a phone call, and we just went bananas. It was so exciting, and going to my first ASCS meeting, to be surrounded by the people who I've idolized throughout my career, and to be I was invited to play to golf with, I think it was Jesse Jupiter and Lou Bigliani, and I didn't golf, and I would say, maybe next time I don't want to be, I'm embarrassed myself, but to be surrounded by giants and to be just led into the inner circle of shoulder experts was so rewarding, and it just stimulates you to want to just continue to do better and better.
Yeah, and it's just another classic story. I mean, once you break through the ceiling, I mean, you're invited to the table, and you're innovating and doing all the same things that they are, and you're a leader in your field, and you're sought after for your opinion, and it's pretty darn cool. It's
been an interesting experience so far.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about innovation. I walk through the exhibit hall here, and there's a gazillion sessions on arthroplasty of the shoulder. And, I joke around, when Bill Levine and I were co-residents together back in the day, you put in a hemiarthroplasty, and, total shoulders were still sort of, what is this thing? And nowadays, stemless, is it reverse? Is it anatomic? Is it, eccentric? Is it lateralized? There's all of these things. And I think also what's interesting is that, sort of navigation has been very much a part of what's happened within hip and knee arthroplasty, but a little late to come into the shoulder world. So what are you doing? What type of shoulder replacement? Who are you working with? What's the prosthesis you use? What are the cool things you're doing?
So my fellowship was with Zimmer Prosthetics. I was trained by the last fellow of Dr. Neer. So we were using the stuff that was part of the Zimmer line. When I moved down to Florida, we didn't really have great representation for shoulders in that. And one thing led to another, and I ended up getting involved in Mark Frankel's IDE for the reverse in 2002. I was cautioned very strongly by some folks, be careful, because, if this ends up being a bad idea, this reverse thing, you don't want that to be a stain on your reputation doing a bad thing early in your career. But we went forward with that. I started to do reverses very early. And then one thing led to another, and I started to use the Exactech shoulder, which had just been launched. I think I was probably their 5th or 6th customer in the U.S. for their shoulder prosthetic. And I really didn't have any eyes on becoming a designer or influencing things, but they had a really nice prosthetic, but the instruments that they sent with it were just horrible. It was not great instrumentation. So I basically pointed out some of the things that I thought that they could improve upon, and say that this was bent 90 degrees, it would work better. And I'm not exaggerating. 3 weeks later, they had created a new modified set of instrumentation and set it down for me. And I was like, I really wasn't asking for it. I was just saying this could be better. And then next thing, we started to communicate more. And finally, I got called up to Gainesville and asked, listen, we liked your ideas. We want to put them in all the trays around the country. We want to sign you up as a consultant. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. It was the furthest
How long
thing.
were you in practice at that time?
It was like, I think I was 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, nobody at 6 years of practice gets invited to be a designer for anything at that point, for sure. But I love it. We just had Marco on, and he was talking about the arduous process of that FDA IDE that he was going through, as well as the process of getting the world to recognize that a reverse total shoulder replacement is a viable option. Nowadays, it's second nature. I think it's 2/3 to 1/3, maybe even more for reverse total shoulders. But I remember in the early 90s, the complications associated with it and the outcomes were really, really bad. And it was just, everybody was like, no, this is not the way to go. I think it's fascinating that you were in the right place at the right time.
And my fellowship project was looking back through a series of anatomic shoulder arthroplasties with rotator cuff tears and analyzing their outcomes. So, I mean, in fellowship, I was studying cuff deficient arthritis, not realizing that like 2 years later that a reverse shoulder replacement would become and be around here.
Literally is serendipity to be in the right moment at the right time.
So many, the ball has bounced just right a number of times for this to be happening right now.
No, I love that. So all of a sudden, 6 years in, your ideas are in, you're like signing some contract with Exactech, and here you go. And from there, you've been innovating, and what's the latest and coolest stuff you're doing?
Well, I think it all goes back to that the company from the start was actually very focused on trying to be surgeon specific. So I found out later that although I thought I was very special that they made retractors for me, that I wasn't. That was sort of like their thing. They really wanted to make sure that everyone had what they needed. So they had a whole department that just made custom retractors and stuff and implant and stuff for people. So it ended
with your name on them too, right?
No name was on it. But one thing led to another within them, and the prosthesis came out. We helped with the design of a fracture specific reverse and platform fracture stem, and that's been released all over the world. The most recent stuff has to do with this artificial intelligence, machine learning, and navigation that we're working on. And it's, again, just an amazing experience because as an orthopedic surgeon, as someone that knows how to take a shoulder apart and put it back together, my exposure to data science and understanding how AI and machine learning works, I was like a babe in the woods with these data scientists, and they had to teach me exactly what it is that we're doing. And for the listeners out there, I think that if you're not familiar with the way that machine learning and AI stuff works now, you need to really get comfortable with it because it's coming at us so fast, and we need to become much, really sophisticated consumers of that information. There's a lot of it, and if we're not really aware, we can discern good studies and bad studies because we do it from day one in residency. We're looking at regular statistics and regular studies, but this machine learning stuff is a whole other world.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you think about all the things that we can do with this, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just second nature. A 10-year-old can get on this thing and do amazing stuff, and yet, why is it that I'm still using a cord on arthroscopy, to a tower? Sure. I mean, so technology has been late to the operating room, but it is really coming on big time right now, for sure. Multiple episodes where we've talked to people about artificial intelligence and navigation. It's like Rand Schwarzkopf said it beautifully in one of our episodes is, do you want to get into a taxi in New York with a guy that's got a AAA map, or do you want to get into the Uber with a guy that's got GPS, right? So doesn't GPS and the navigation and the identifying of how you're putting things in make you a better surgeon?
I could tell you that the first time I did an anatomic shoulder replacement using navigation, I thought that it was wrong because the way that I was putting in my glenoids, I must have been putting them in more retroverted than I appreciated. And then, I held up the drill to the glenoid and I was saying, that can't be neutral. And I reassessed. And ultimately, the computer was right. I was probably putting my glenoids in more retroverted than I would want to put them in. And it's made me a better surgeon because now I can look at the glenoid and I know exactly where I think it should be, and then the computer agrees with me. So I'm actually doing a better job of positioning my implants on the glenoid. But even beyond that, now one of the features that we have in the system is that we're able to not only prepare the glenoid and do all the things we need to do, but at the end of the operation, we're able to hold our tracker on the glenoid component and save exactly where in 3D space on the scapula the implant was placed. So for future study, we're able to now try to answer questions of with patients that are like this pre-op, if you operate on them this way intraoperatively, they can get results like that. And right now, the only way that people would be able to do that is to get post-op CT scans, which in the U.S. is incredibly difficult to do. So from a research tool standpoint, the navigation is really blowing up.
I mean, I find it fascinating. The glenoid, again, for the listeners, is the cup portion of the shoulder. And it's like, it's like this big.
And silver dollar.
And you guys are like putting like 3 or 4 screws in there. And I'm like, if you're not sure, where you're putting those screws, you could really harm someone. So conceptually, I think it's a really important idea.
Some of these badly eroded sockets, these badly eroded glenoids, you really don't have a whole lot of room to err.
You got to get it right the first time.
And you in some of these cases with navigation, you have a millimeter on either side of your cage, and when you can drop it in just the right spot, and you look in there and you put a suction in the hole, and you say, "I can't believe I didn't violate the anterior or posterior wall." And I know that if I was doing it myself by flying by the seat of my pants and aiming where I think it should be, that there's no way that I would have been as precise as that.
So there's no question from your experience, decades of surgery at this point, being a master surgeon, that the navigation helps you intraoperatively to make sure that the components are being placed. One of the arguments is always, well, how does that change the overall outcome for the patient? And has there been literature or science yet to prove or at least show that we're heading in the right direction by improving outcomes?
I think there is. We're starting to see a paper that just came out showing reduced complications and trending toward better outcomes. But in reality, reverse shoulder arthroplasty is almost like the difference between, I think, anatomic arthroplasty. So Derek Cuff gave a talk about the Masters and talked about golfing and things like that. Anatomic arthroplasty is like playing with blade clubs. that only really expert golfers can do it. And reverse arthroplasty is like using cavity back game improvement clubs. Like there's a lot of forgiveness within reverse shoulder arthroplasty that you can put reverse shoulder arthroplasties in a number of different ways, as evidenced by how many systems there are out there and how different they can be philosophically, and you can still get good results. So to see a difference between navigated and non-navigated cases is going to be hard, but having thousands of patients in the registry is going to help.
Yeah, the numbers have to be proven over time, which they will. But I think that it would be remiss if we didn't think that this sort of navigation, by doing a better job, putting the implants in, will hopefully improve the outcomes and maybe even longevity, for the patients as well. Look, Howard, this has been, fantastic. Really, really appreciate the time that you've taken out of your busy schedule to be here. Love you telling your story about being a DO and the process into mainstream orthopedics. And then, of course, the serendipity of having to be in the right moment at the right place. And now, to really be a master shoulder surgeon. We greatly appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun talking.
It's my pleasure. This is Dr. Scott Sigman, #FollowTheFro. Host of The Ortho Show. Till next time.